The rain started suddenly, one of those thick, hammering storms that feel like they've been waiting all day just to come down all at once. I was standing on the side of the highway, thumb out, soaked to the bone, my boots sinking into the mud. The day had started out dry, even hopeful. I'd caught a ride just outside of Evansville, and the driver, a quiet man with nicotine-stained fingers and a dashboard lined with matchbooks, had taken me almost 100 miles before turning off onto a side road without a word. Said he had family to check on. Then he left me there, middle of nowhere. Two-lane road cutting through endless dark woods, not even a signpost to mark it. The rain drove hard and the light was fading. I remember looking up and seeing the clouds press in close, heavy and slow like wet wool. My coat was no match. I had nowhere to go. Then I saw the sign. It blinked dimly through the mist. A crooked neon panel half swallowed by pine branches. Just 3 words lit in red: Pine Creek Motel. The M was flickering, and the paint on the post was long faded, but it was shelter. The gravel driveway curved inward through the trees like a path into some forgotten clearing. I stepped off the road and made my way toward the building. Mud sucked at my heels, and the branches above dripped cold water down the back of my neck. But the glow ahead pulled me in. The motel was a single-story structure with a pitched roof and rows of narrow windows. It looked like it hadn't seen travelers in years, and yet the sign was on. A dim yellow light spilled from a window near the entrance. Inside, it was warm. The air smelled of wood polish and old radiator steam. A woman sat behind the counter, leafing through a ledger. She looked up when I entered, but didn't seem surprised. "You're soaked," she said gently. Her voice was thin, almost like it came from farther away than it should have. "We've still got rooms." I thanked her, my teeth chattering. She slid the register toward me. I signed without asking for a price. My hands were numb and the ink smudged. "End of the hall, number 4, she said, handing me a tarnished brass key. "There's hot water if you let it run." The hallway was narrow, lined with faded wallpaper that peeled at the seams. My boots echoed on the linoleum. Room 4 was on the right, the door already slightly ajar as if waiting. The room itself was plain bed, small dresser, chair in the corner, a threadbare curtain over the window. I didn't care. I peeled off my wet clothes and stood under the shower until the pipes groaned and spat lukewarm water. I don't remember falling asleep. The rain outside softened into a dull, steady tapping. I woke up sometime in the night. Not to a sound at first. Just a feeling, a weight in the chest, a cold that hadn't been there before. Then I heard it. Footsteps, soft, deliberate, moving down the hallway outside my room. Not hurried, not slow, just a steady, unchanging pace. I sat up in the dark, every muscle in my body rigid. My room had no clock, no light except the silvery wash of moon through the curtain. I listened. The steps reached my door and stopped. I waited, breath held, expecting a knock. Nothing. I rose and stepped barefoot to the door. The floor was cold. I turned the knob, locked. Still locked, but no one moved beyond it. I pressed my ear to the door. Silence. It felt like hours before I backed away and sat on the edge of the bed. I didn't sleep again. By morning, everything felt wrong. The first thing I noticed was the dust. It coated the floor, the dresser, the windowsill. My footprints were the only ones. I opened the door to the hallway, same dust, undisturbed, like no one had walked it in years. The wallpaper hung in tatters now, mold blooming in dark patches along the baseboards. I moved back toward the front desk. The lobby was empty. No lights, no warmth. The counter was covered in a sheet, stained and frayed. The phone on the wall hung lifeless. I pulled the sheet back. The ledger was gone. Only a broken pen remained. I went back outside. The sign no longer glowed. It was there, but shattered. Broken glass, clinging to rusted metal. The driveway was overgrown. No tire tracks, No footprints but mine. I stood in the middle of the lot, turning in circles, heart pounding. A truck horn snapped me out of it. A rig was coming down the highway, old International, red cab, hauling empty trailers. I ran to the road and waved. The driver pulled over, window down. "You okay?" he asked. He was in his 60s, weathered face thick with road dust. "I stayed at the motel," I said. "Pine Creek. I need to call someone." He stared at me. "What motel?" I turned and pointed. He followed my gaze. "There ain't been no Pine Creek motel since '52, he said slowly. "It burned. Gas explosion, I think. My uncle was on the volunteer fire crew. Said they never found the night clerk. Just ashes and some bones. They bulldozed it. That land's been empty 20 years. I didn't answer. "There's no turnoffs between here and the county line," he added. "Only the old mill road, but that's been closed since the flood." I climbed into the truck without a word. We drove in silence for a long time. And when I looked back, the clearing was gone. Just trees and rain. I didn't speak during the ride. The driver, he said his name was Robert Holly, didn't ask much. He seemed to sense something was wrong, but didn't press. The cab smelled of stale tobacco and diesel. There was a rusted crucifix bolted to the dashboard with wire. It swung as we turned onto a wider road, the rain finally thinning into mist. He offered me a thermos of bitter coffee. I drank it without tasting. We stopped at a filling station in a place called Clay Hollow. Just a few storefronts and a post office with broken steps. There was a diner beside it, and Robert said I should get warm. Before I left the cab, he gave me a look I'll never forget, somewhere between pity and warning. Inside the diner, the air was close and greasy, but it was warm. I ordered eggs and toast I couldn't finish. My hands were still shaking. A waitress with dark curls and a cigarette balanced on her lip poured me more coffee. "You come in from the ridge?" she asked casually. I hitched. "Got caught in the storm," I said. "Stayed the night in a place off the road. Pine Creek Motel." She froze mid-pour. The coffee spilled a little. "Say that again." "Pine Creek. There was a woman there. Thin, polite. I think her name started with an E." She didn't speak for a moment. Then she sat down across from me, uninvited. "You didn't stay in that place. You dreamed it, or saw something else," she said, almost whispering now. "That motel burned down long ago. Folks don't go up that ridge anymore." I asked her how she knew. "My father was a county fire chief. It happened in winter of '52. Explosion took out the north wall. They said it was the furnace. One survivor, a traveler like you. They found him wandering barefoot down the slope, mumbling about a woman in a blue dress." I didn't answer. My food had gone cold. "I was just a girl," she continued, "but I remember the smell. For weeks it lingered, like burnt cloth and copper. Later, I walked to the library across the street. Old building, red brick, quiet. I asked for the town records. The clerk was a man with thick glasses and trembling hands. He brought me a dusty volume from the archives, newspapers bound in leather string. I flipped through slowly. February 1952. Fire claims Pine Creek Lodge. Black and white photograph. Rubble. Firemen standing in ash. Silhouettes of trees in the background. The article listed 4 names. Owner, Elias Dobbs. Clerk, Miss Eleanor Ray. 2 guests, no names, no details. 1 survivor, unnamed. The strange part was the photo. The image showed the ruins, clearly charred, no walls standing, just beams collapsed inward. But in the far right corner of the picture, past the caution tape, a figure stood. Small, blurred. Could have been a trick of the smoke, but it was wearing a dress. I looked up the name Eleanor Ray in the town's death registry. There was no official record of her burial. No obituary. Just a hand-scrawled note beside her name in one of the church books. Presumed lost in fire. No remains identified. I left the library just before dusk. Something had shifted in me. I couldn't stop thinking about the room, the key, the hallway, the dust that hadn't been there the night before. I tried to reason it out, tell myself I'd stumbled into an old property someone was squatting on. A vagrant's hideout, maybe. But it didn't fit. I still had the key in my coat pocket. Brass. Worn numbers. Room 4. The tag was leather, cracked, faint outline of the motel's name stamped on it. Not modern, not new. That night, I couldn't sleep. I checked into a boarding house down the hill. The wallpaper was yellowed and the room smelled of mothballs, but it was quiet. I stared at the ceiling for hours. Around midnight, I heard the knock. 1. Then silence. Then again. I rose, cold all over. There was no one in the hallway, but the smell was there. Wood smoke, damp fabric, and something sweeter, spoiled. The next morning, I asked around. Most people didn't want to talk about the fire. An old man named Wesley, who ran a bait shop near the river, said he remembered seeing the place once as a child before it burned. Said it was wrong-shaped, whatever that meant. That people avoided it even before the accident. Built on old bones, he muttered. Forests don't like to be cut. I took the long way back toward the ridge that afternoon. Walked until the sun dipped behind the treetops. No road curved where I remembered. The trees were thicker, but I pushed deeper, searching for any trace. I found the clearing just before dusk. There was nothing left, no sign, no gravel path, no ruins, just trees and a small depression in the earth, soft with moss. But the air was colder there, and the silence too clean. Like even the birds knew not to make a sound. I stood there for what felt like hours, staring at nothing, key still clenched in my fist. When I turned to leave, I found something tucked beneath a rotting log. A ledger, waterlogged, molded, but intact enough to see names written on the cover in black ink, and one entry near the bottom of the first page. G. Mercer, checked in. Storm, room 4, my name. I left the clearing with the ledger wrapped in my coat. My hands trembled the whole walk back, and my legs felt too light, like the ground might slip out beneath me if I looked down. Back at the boarding house, I laid it out on the desk beneath the desk lamp and tried not to breathe the smell of mildew that rose from its pages. It was a guest book. The first date was written in slanted cursive. June 15th, 1937. Names, room numbers, times of check-in. Most entries were brief. A few had scribbled notes beside them. Car trouble, snowed in, passed through on way to Louisville. The ink changed color over the years, fading from black to brown to something almost red. Some lines were crossed out. Others had no room numbers assigned. Then I found the one I'd seen in the woods. My name, G. Mercer. Dated 2 days before. Not possible. Below that were 3 more entries, each with the same date, written in the same hand. H. Ellis, room 1, C. Weber, room 2, J. Lofgren, room 5. There was no one else in the motel the night I stayed. At least, that's what I thought. I turned the page. The next sheet was blank, but warped, as if water had soaked through only one spot. I tilted it toward the light. There was faint writing there, almost invisible. I retrieved a soft pencil from the drawer and rubbed gently across the page like I'd seen in crime reels or old detective manuals. Slowly, impressions rose from beneath the surface. Words. Don't leave your door open. She walks at night. No eyes, just the sound. Some letters were cut deep into the paper, as if the writer had pressed until the nib tore through. And underneath, scrawled in large, childlike loops, room 4 doesn't lock. Not really. I stood up and stepped back. For a long time, I didn't move. That night, I took the key and the ledger to the sheriff's office on the edge of town, a squat cement building with a single flickering porch light and a soda machine that didn't work. Sheriff Lester Handley was a wide man with pale blue eyes and a smoker's cough that kept him talking in bursts. He looked at the ledger like it was a bomb. "Where'd you get this?" he asked. I told him. He sat back in his chair, creaking. "Place has been closed longer than I've been wearing this badge. My brother remembers it, says they never found all the bodies. Only what looked like teeth and one metal belt buckle." I slid the key across the desk. Handley picked it up, turned it in his fingers. His eyes narrowed. "You sure this isn't a prank?" he asked. "There's people around here who like to play up ghost stories. Kids sometimes leave fake signs in the woods. We find campfires, torn up furniture, old mannequins they drag from scrap." I shook my head. "You seen anything else? Since then?" I told him about the knock on the door at the boarding house, the coffee spill at the diner, the man on the highway who said the road didn't turn. Handley stood up and crossed to a locked file cabinet. He returned with a black binder. Inside were faded photographs, all labeled, newspaper clippings. One was from a state fire inspector, dated February the 7th, 1952. Combustion point inconsistent with standard furnace failure. Accelerants may have been involved. Another showed the ruins again, this time from a closer angle. The rubble, a scorched mattress spring, what looked like half of a melted phone. But what stopped me was the wallpaper, peeling on a surviving scrap of wall. It matched what I'd seen. The same pattern, pale green with vertical diamonds. I slept with the lights on that night. The next morning, I went back to the diner. Same waitress, same seat. I ordered coffee and nothing else. "Tell me about the girl," I said quietly. "The one in the blue dress." She didn't answer right away. Then she pulled up her sleeve and showed me a scar. Small, raised, about the size of a nickel. "She followed me home once," she whispered. "When I was 12, we were out near the woods on a dare. I saw a woman standing behind the old tree line, pale, wet hair, just watching. Next morning I woke up with this." I asked her if it could have been a dream. She stared at me hard. "It's never a dream, it's a loop, you understand?" I didn't, but I felt something in my chest tighten. After I paid, I walked out and crossed the street to the church. I hadn't been inside one in years. The doors were unlocked. The pews smelled of wax and pine oil. A priest was polishing the brass on the altar rail. He looked up when I entered. "I need to ask about someone," I said. "Then you're not the first," he replied, like he already knew. He led me to a storage room near the back, filled with ledgers, baptism books, and loose papers stacked in plastic tubs. We sat for hours, flipping through names. Ray, Eleanor, Pine Creek. Eventually, he pulled out a page from an old logbook. There, in faded ink, was a name. Eleanor W. Ray. Born 1928. Confirmed into the parish, 1941. Listed as missing, February the 5th, 1952. In the margin, a priest's note. Unaccounted for during fire. Personal items recovered, including a silver rosary and coat with burn damage. Remains never positively identified. I asked if anyone had ever tried to bless the site, or cleanse it, whatever you call it. The priest shook his head. "You can't bless ash, not when the roots underneath are still alive." I didn't understand what he meant. Not then. But that night, in my room at the boarding house, the key still in my pocket, began to feel heavy. Heavier than brass should be. And I could hear it again. Not footsteps this time. Breathing, somewhere just outside the window. The next morning I found my window unlocked. I hadn't opened it. I remembered that clearly. The latch was old brass, stiff with rust. It usually groaned when moved. But now it sat open by less than a hand's width. Just enough for cold air to spill across the sill. My coat, which I'd left draped on the chair near the window, was damp. The key to room 4, which I'd tucked into the inside pocket the night before, was gone. I turned the entire room upside down, checked the floorboards, under the bed, the water basin, behind the curtains. Nothing. But on the inside of the glass, just near the latch, were 5 long smudges. Finger length, pale, as if someone or something had rested their hand there before slipping back into the dark. I left town that day, told the boarding house keeper I'd had a family emergency, paid cash, walked to the edge of the highway and waited. An hour passed before a truck pulled over, an older man, balding Missouri plates. I told him I was heading south. I didn't care where. We drove for 2 hours in silence. Past brown hills and abandoned barns, long stretches of pine, and occasional sun-bleached signs pointing toward towns with names that didn't appear on my map. I tried to sleep. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the ledger, that blank page with my name. He dropped me at a diner near the county line. It was mid-afternoon. The sun was low, even though it wasn't yet evening. I ordered coffee and sat by the window, eyes flicking to the tree line on the far side of the lot. There was a police cruiser parked across from me. Something pulled at me, a thought I didn't want to entertain. I walked outside and crossed the lot, shielding my eyes from the glare. The cruiser had mud splattered up the side and a county seal I didn't recognize. Through the windshield, I saw a binder resting on the dash. On the cover was a department sticker, typed in thick black letters. Incident file, Pine Creek Motel, fire report, addendum. My pulse thudded in my ears. I circled around to the passenger side and peered in. The binder was open to a photo I'd never seen. It showed a burned mattress frame and, beside it, what looked like an old rotary phone. Only the base remained. On the floor of the car, between the front seats, lay something else. A key. Brass. Leather tag. I couldn't see the number, but I didn't need to. I backed away. Before I could return to the diner, the officer stepped out of the building next door, a small postal depot. He spotted me, nodded politely, and asked if I needed assistance. I asked if he'd worked the Pine Creek case. He looked at me a long time before answering. "That's not a case we open anymore," he said. He was in his early 50s, clean uniform, kind face, but his eyes darted the way people's do when they're searching for something they've lost in their own memory. "You been up that ridge?" he asked. I said yes. "You see anything?" I told him a little. Not much. "You sleep there," he said. "Yes." He exhaled sharply and shook his head. "They're stories," he said. "You don't want to start listening to them, especially if you've already spent the night." I asked what he meant. He leaned on the cruiser, looking away from me. Every 10 or 12 years, someone finds the place again, or thinks they do. Sometimes they come back. Sometimes they don't. I asked about the ledger. He gave a slight nod. "One of the old deputies recovered it. Should have turned to ash with the rest, but somehow it didn't. We kept it sealed. Then a few years back, the archives moved buildings. The box went missing for 2 weeks. When it turned up again, it had a new page added. Just one. Blank when we last saw it. Next time we opened it, 3 names, all spelled neat, same ink as the rest." I didn't speak. He looked back at me. One of those names was mine. I waited for him to say more, but he didn't. Instead, he got into the cruiser and drove off. I stood in the lot until the dust settled. I spent the next 2 nights in different towns. Small places with lights that stayed on past midnight and radios that played hymns even on weekdays. I didn't sleep much. I kept expecting the knock again. It never came. On the 3rd day, I went to the county records office in Madison. Larger city, more archives. I asked to view any building permits or zoning records for the ridge north of Clay Hollow. The clerk pulled the files. Most were incomplete. Handwritten changes, corrections, canceled permits. But one entry stood out. In late 1936, a construction firm from Illinois filed plans to develop a roadside inn called Pine Creek Motor Lodge. 5 rooms, dining area, root cellar, no date of completion listed. But under the section for location, coordinates had been added by hand. I jotted them down. The next morning, I rented a car and drove out to the ridge. I wasn't sure what I was hoping to find. Maybe a foundation. Maybe nothing. I followed the old road, barely a path now, but something beneath the trees made it possible to follow, like something didn't want the trail to vanish. After an hour of walking, I stopped. There it was. A single stone step, cracked down the center. The ground around it was flat, unnaturally so, too level for forest floor. I took out the paper with the coordinates. They matched. Exactly, but there was no building, no ruins, no metal, just loam and moss and silence. And yet, my foot hit something hollow. I crouched, brushed aside the leaves. A trapdoor, rusted iron hinges, half-rotted wood. I pried it open. Darkness below. Stale air, dry and cold. Steps led down. Somewhere deep beneath the earth, something creaked, like a door that hadn't been opened in decades. I stood at the edge of the opening, trying to decide whether what I was doing was brave or irrevocably stupid. The air rising from beneath was heavy with the smell of old wood, iron, and something older like dry soil that hadn't seen daylight in half a century. I couldn't see more than a few steps down. The narrow stairwell was swallowed in blackness, and the sides of the shaft were lined with stone, mortared roughly as if it had been dug in haste or secrecy. The wooden ladder creaked beneath my weight. Some rungs had rotted, but others held. I gripped the side bars tightly, moving one slow step at a time. The light from above narrowed behind me. My boots touched dirt at the bottom. When I turned around, I wasn't in a basement, not really. I was in a corridor, narrow, just wide enough for a man to pass sideways. Walls were made of brick, not fieldstone like the foundation above, but old city-style brick. Clay red, mortar thin. Every 10 feet or so, rusted metal sconces were bolted into the wall, as if someone had once intended the space to be lit by flame. But they hadn't been used in decades. I walked for what must have been 50 paces. Then the corridor opened into a small room. Square. About 12 feet across, a table stood in the center. A real table oak, heavy, legs carved with decorative inlays. Dustless, as if someone had wiped it just yesterday. Beside it stood a single wooden chair, a coil of worn rope looped around the base of one leg. Against the far wall, shelves, dozens of them, empty mostly, except one near the top where I saw something strange. A box, shoebox sized, tin, with flaking black paint and a hinged lid. I took it down carefully. It was heavier than I expected. Inside, papers, folded letters, fragments of photographs, all of them brittle from age. The letters were handwritten, most dated between 1943 and 1951. They were addressed to names I didn't recognize. Some had no addressee at all, just first names and a year. But what chilled me was the handwriting. It was the same on each one. Same slant, same pressure, even when the letters were supposedly written years apart. I opened one envelope that had never been sealed. Inside, a single line on a torn scrap of hotel stationery. The room does not forget. The moment I read it, I heard something scrape in the corridor behind me. A slow, deliberate sound. Wood on stone. Like the dragging of a chair. I didn't move. I held my breath. The sound stopped. Then, something knocked twice on the stone wall just outside the room. I couldn't explain it. There was no door, no adjacent hallway. But the knock had echoed like a sound made only a few feet away. I packed the letters into my coat and left. As I turned to go, I noticed something I had missed when I entered. Carved into the wall near the corner, shallow but deliberate, were names. Initials. Dates. They weren't random. They formed a sequence. Each line read, initials, full name, checked-in date, checked-out date. But for half the entries, the checked-out was blank. The most recent name was J-I-E-R-O-H. James Ronald Hanley. Checked in, October 17th, 1953. Checked out. That was only 3 months ago, and the initials before his MTS had a checkout date that simply said N.A. I climbed back up the ladder. The daylight was harsh, but I was grateful for it. I took one last look at the trap door. I didn't close it. By the time I reached the town again, the clouds were gathering. Storm clouds, low and swollen with the color of old bruises. I ducked into the library, the only public building open past dusk. I needed to know if any of those names were real. The librarian was a thin man with a nervous way of blinking and a faint tremor in one hand. I gave him a few of the names, asked if he could check their records. At first, he hesitated. Then he led me to the basement where they kept old census documents and newspaper archives. It was cold down there, and the lights flickered when the rain began overhead. We spent an hour digging. Then we found it. James Ronald Hanley, age 32. Former electrician, lived in Polk County, missing since October. Last seen boarding a truck outside Madison. His photo in the newspaper clipping was blurry, but I recognized the coat. The same green canvas I'd seen folded over a chair in the corner of room 4 that morning, before everything changed. I asked the librarian if any other disappearances had been reported from that area. He nodded slowly. "There's a pattern," he said. "Always around this time of year. Fall, just before the snow. Men mostly. Some women, always traveling alone, sometimes on foot. They disappear for a week, maybe 2. Then turn up walking back into town from the north. Clothes clean but torn, not a scratch on them. And not one of them remembers where they were." I asked how many. He didn't answer, just opened a drawer and pulled out a file folder as thick as a city phone book. The cover read, "Unexplained Reappearances, 1938, 1954. Each file was labeled with a name, and in the upper corner of each report was a hand-stamped code. Same 3 digits, over and over. PC4. I asked what it meant. He looked at me like I should already know. Pine Creek, room 4. That night I didn't go back to the rented room. I took a cot in the back of the library, with the quiet hum of rain against the basement windows and the distant creak of wood settling above me. The librarian Harold left the key with me and said he'd be back after morning services. I couldn't sleep, not even with the folder lying shut beside me, thick with the stories of those who had come back, unchanged on the outside but fragmented beneath the skin. At some point after midnight, I opened the folder again. I went through the files, one by one. No photographs, only typed reports on real paper with carbon copies typed on real machines. The paper smelled of old glue and damp pulp. The reports followed a pattern. All began with the words, "Subject was located returning from northern perimeter. Status physically stable, memory unreliable." Then came the interviews. One man claimed to have been stuck in a train station that didn't exist. Timeless, fogged, no clocks. A woman described being inside a hotel room where the view from the window showed an ocean, though she'd never left the mountains. Another said he'd eaten a full meal each night at a table where the chair across from him was always occupied by someone he could never clearly see. Most of them had one thing in common. They remembered a number, not a phone number, not a year, just one number, repeating in dreams or carved into walls or whispered during sleep. 4. It wasn't the room number, they insisted. It was something else, something older. By dawn, I had pinned 3 dozen names to a rough timeline I sketched on the back of an old blueprint. From 1938 to 1954, the intervals between the disappearances followed no exact pattern, but there was one year with none at all. 1945, the year the war ended. It didn't make sense, unless whatever was happening required the absence of collective attention, as if the world's eyes turning outward disrupted whatever was buried here. I returned to the corridor beneath the hill that afternoon. This time, I brought tools, rope, lantern, chalk, and a small metal whistle I kept in my coat since I was a child. The trap door was still open. I tied off the rope to a nearby tree, slid down carefully, and lit the lantern. It cast a weak yellow cone, barely reaching the edges of the narrow tunnel. The air was colder this time, more still. The corridor was unchanged, but the room at the end had shifted. The table was gone. The shelves, too. The walls now bore nothing but a series of frames. Dozens of them. Empty, except for one. It held a photograph, black and white. Faded. A man seated in a chair in a room I instantly recognized, room 4. The wallpaper was the same. The oil lamp on the nightstand, but there was no bed. The man wore a jacket and hat. His hands rested on his knees. He wasn't looking at the camera. He was looking at the mirror behind the photographer. And reflected in that mirror, barely visible behind the photographer's shoulder, was a second figure. Thin, pale, standing in the hallway. I stepped back. That's when I heard the first voice. A whisper, low and frayed, as if the speaker had been silent for years. I never left. I spun around. The tunnel behind me was empty. The voice again closer this time, but not directional, like it was coming through the walls. Room 4 isn't a place, it's a choice. I dropped the photo, ran, but the corridor had grown. The ladder was no longer where it had been. My chalk marks on the wall, gone. The sconces, more of them now. The same corridor, but longer. I kept running. Then I hit the wall. A door had appeared where none was before. Iron-banded, locked from the outside. And on the door, scratched deep into the wood, the same initials I'd seen in the librarian's folder. JRH, MTS, DLC. And now, fresh, not yet dry. My own. LEN. I turned, heart pounding. The tunnel behind me had gone silent. The lantern flickered, then went out. Everything became motionless. I could hear my own heartbeat. I reached for the whistle. Blew hard. No sound came. It had rusted shut in the damp. I slid to the floor, listened. Then, footsteps. Very slow. One every few seconds. They weren't in the corridor. They were above me. In the room that no longer existed. I must have lost consciousness. When I opened my eyes, there was no sound, no light, only the vague sensation of weight pressing against my chest. The air tasted like old water and copper. I was no longer sure how long I'd been underground. Hours, possibly more. Eventually, I forced myself up. The iron door was gone. In its place stood nothing but smooth brick. Seamless, like it had never been there. As if the whole structure had realigned while I lay in the dark. I stumbled forward, hand on the wall, searching for anything, an edge, a crack, even a draft of air. After what felt like forever, I saw a dim glow ahead. I moved toward it, slow, cautious, my boots scraping across the packed soil floor. The corridor opened into another room, larger than the first and stranger. The walls were lined with filing cabinets, rusted, labels peeled off. In the center, a shortwave radio set atop a collapsible military desk, the kind used in field command posts. It looked old, even for the time. Bakelite knobs, dials labeled in Cyrillic script. It was connected to a long coiled cable that disappeared into a hole in the floor. The device was still powered, not on, but humming. A low, almost imperceptible sound, like a sine wave buried beneath layers of static. There were also papers scattered across the desk. Field notes, reports, each one marked with the same code, PC4OCT2. Most were unreadable, water-damaged or faded, but a few contained strange excerpts. Transcripts, I realized, of radio transmissions. October the 20th, 1948, 03:12 hours. Intercept 2 and 21 times This is 4. Repeat. This is 4. Coordinates unchanging. Occupant shows no signs of withdrawal. Memory stable. Voice transmission maintained. 3:13 hours. Repeat. This is 4. Requesting confirmation. Room remains receptive. No outside contact. Occupant remains. That was it. No response, no explanation, only a repeated claim. This is 4. I tried the radio, turned the knobs, listened, just static. Until I reached one frequency, a narrow band around 122 megahertz, where I caught something. Not a voice. A tone. Repetitive. Long, short pause. Then again. Same pattern. I scribbled it down. Morse code. It spelled a single word. Stay. I yanked the cord from the wall. The tone stopped, but the low hum persisted. I reached for one of the file drawers. It stuck. I pried it open with my pocket knife. Inside, photographs. More than 100. Each one stamped with a date. Most between 1941 and 1951. Faces, some blank-eyed, some smiling, some visibly terrified. Many were in front of that same wallpaper, the peeling striped pattern from room 4. I recognized one of them. Not someone I'd ever met, but someone I had seen. In a framed portrait at the Pine Creek Sheriff's Office when I was passing through, Sheriff Marcus T. Slade. Served from 1935 to 1946. Killed in a hunting accident, the caption said. This was him standing in that same room, holding a lantern, hand outstretched toward the mirror. Behind him, the same blurred figure. Pale, thin, watching. A third drawer held something else, an audio reel, labeled only PC4 Recovery Interview 07 MTS. I had no way to play it, but that wasn't the worst part. In the bottom of the drawer was a telegram, creased, stained. I opened it carefully. To Federal Field Office, Madison, from Observer Station, 4 date, October the 15th, 1953. Subject re-entered field parameters. Unit secured. Observer maintains position. Recommend halt to interventions. The room remembers. That date again. October 15th, 2 days before James Ronald Hanley vanished. The edges of the paper were singed. That meant fire. The librarian had said the motel had burned down, but this document had survived. Somehow. Suddenly I knew what I had to do. I had to get out. This wasn't a basement, not anymore. It was a system, a loop, a structure built for isolation, not containment. Room 4 wasn't the problem. It was the aperture, the mouth. What lay below was the throat, and it was swallowing. I traced my steps backward through the tunnel. No changes this time. Same curve, same sconces, same ladder. I climbed fast. I burst through the trapdoor into cold, wet daylight. The sky had darkened. Wind bit through my coat. The tree I'd tied my rope to was split in half, as if struck by lightning. The motel above was still gone. Just foundation stones and crumbled chimneys, and a smell smoke, faint but present. Old smoke, the kind that settles deep into the ground. I staggered back to the highway. An hour later, I flagged down a trucker. Older man, sun-wrinkled, polite. He looked confused when I told him where I'd been. "That place?" he said. "That burned down at least 10 years ago. They said it was a grease fire. But I remember my uncle, he was with the volunteer fire crew. He said something was wrong about it." Wrong how? Smoke was black, but the wood never fully burned. Took days to go cold. And when they dug through the remains, there was no metal. Not from the beds, the stove. Nothing, like the fire didn't melt, it erased. We drove in silence for nearly 2 hours. The highway ran like a scar across the hills, winding through fog and patches of dying trees. I didn't tell him what I had found. He didn't ask. From time to time, I saw him glance at me in the rearview mirror. each time a little longer, like he was making sure I was still the only one in the cab. Just past what should have been the old county line, he dropped me off near a gas station that had closed years ago. I thanked him. He nodded once, didn't speak, and drove off into the mist. I walked. Not toward town, not toward anything. I followed the smell of wood smoke, faint but real. I don't know what I was expecting, but I found myself at the base of an old hill, thick with pine and mud. The ground beneath my boots was soft, as if something massive had shifted below the surface. There was no sign of the motel, not even the ruins, but the tree that had been split by lightning or whatever it was still stood there, charred black along one side. I took out the blueprint I'd sketched earlier, found the alignment points, paced out the foundation based on the position of the chimney stones. There, an indentation in the soil, square-shaped, the dimensions of a room. I stood in the center and waited. No voices, no light, just wind through the branches and the slow creak of old trees watching something they couldn't name. I didn't return to the city. Instead, I headed north. I found a boarding house run by a woman named Agnes, who said little and watched much. I gave a false name, paid for a week in advance, spent most of my time writing everything I could remember. Not just the motel, the corridor, the documents, the photograph, the sound, the number. 4. I mailed the notes to an address in Milwaukee, a man who owed me a favor from the service. Told him to lock it in a safe and burn it if I didn't write again in 60 days. That was 37 days ago. Since then, I've started seeing things in mirrors. Not people, not shapes exactly. Shadows that don't follow motion. Reflections that stay a heartbeat longer than they should. One morning, I found a mark above the bed frame chalk. Faint, a single symbol. A square with a line dividing it into quarters. Room 4. I didn't draw it. I checked the local records, quietly. Asked around using the pretense of research. History of fires in the region. I found only fragments. An unexplained structure collapse in October of 1937. A boy who vanished during hunting season in 1949. A woman who ran into traffic on Route 11 in 1952, screaming about a door that wouldn't stay shut. Then, something else. A short article clipped from an old newspaper. Federal agents investigate fire in abandoned station house, Pine Creek region. No photo, no official cause listed, but the date caught my eye. October 17th, 1954. 3 days after I was there. Which means someone knew I'd gone down and tried to erase it again. They always do. But places like that, they don't burn. Not really. They sink, they wait, they listen, and they remember. That's what I've come to believe. It wasn't a haunting. Not in the way stories like to pretend. It wasn't a ghost or a curse. It was older than that. Older than the building, older than the town, maybe older than the country. A structure that feeds on the patterns we ignore. A place with no name, no record, no coordinates. Only a number. 4. The motel wasn't the beginning. It was just an opening. A crack. Somewhere right now, I believe it's still open. To someone else. Maybe someone driving alone in the rain. Maybe someone who takes the wrong exit and finds themselves on a stretch of highway that doesn't exist on any map. Who sees a flickering neon sign. Who smells warm food. Who sees a kind woman behind the desk. Who never blinks quite fast enough. And who, later that night, hears footsteps in the hall and finds the door won't open. If that's you, then you already know the rest. And you also know that no matter how far you run, no matter how long you wait, the room remembers. It always remembers. And it never lets go.